Chapter 8 already. This chapter is going to look at something called absorption and variable costing. Big fancy words, but honestly you already know one of them and the other's not very hard to learn. We're going to look at a few other things in the chapter, but several different concepts, all kind of interrelated and all pretty easy. Just let's take them one at a time and work through them. The difference between absorption and variable costing really hinges on one thing: fixed factory overhead. Where to put that on the income statement or where to deal with it. We've been doing absorption costing. You didn't know it, but that's what you've been learning as you've been going through the first 6 chapters of the book. That's why I've got the way you've learned so far. As you've been learning absorption costing, you just didn't know that was what it was called. Just to kind of review, we said in absorption costing, product costs includes direct materials, direct labor, variable overhead, and fixed overhead. The thing that we say this all hinges on, we've been sticking it as a product cost. And then expenses are the period costs. Selling expenses, general and administrative expenses, those were period costs. Then, I'm sorry, scrolling too far. The other way to look at it is variable costing. Variable costing puts fixed factory overhead in as a period cost. It puts it down below with the expenses. And only direct materials, direct labor, and variable overhead are put in the product costs. For a good description of it all, see page 344 at the bottom, which will show you how you determine product and period costs based on these 2 methods of costing. We're going to work through a couple examples. Let's take a look at exercises 13 and 14 on page 368. Exercise 13 and 14 both come back to the same basic information at the very top of the page for Judson Company. They ask us to figure out how many units are in ending inventory. That's where it's all going to start with. How many units are in ending inventory, and then from there make an income statement based on either absorption costing or variable costing. So when I teach my students in financial accounting and teach merchandising businesses, I always introduce the 5-box concept. You've done this, you just may not have drawn 5 boxes to do it. So I'm going to scroll out so you can kind of see our 5 boxes. I know it gets pretty small in terms of size, but you can get an overview and then we'll zoom in and work with it. We have 5 boxes. One is beginning inventory, one is the number of units we produce. Those 2 are added together to get what you have available to sell. And then all the products you have available to sell, there's really only 2 options of what happened to them. You either sold them or they're still here in ending inventory. Well, we're trying to find ending inventory. That is what this is asking us to do. So we're going to come down here to ending inventory and put question marks because that's the thing we're trying to find. Now let's go back up to what they did tell us. Beginning inventory is 300 units. And this is all given in the problem. Then we produced 15,000 units. So if we add those 2 together, 300 and 15,000, we'd say that throughout this period of time, I don't know if this is a year, yes, it's a year, we had 15,300 units available to sell to our customers. And then it goes on to tell us how many we sold. We sold 12,700 units. So out of the 15,300 that we had available to sell, we sold 12,700. So we can do some quick subtraction and figure out how many are left. 15,300, of which we sold 12,700. We have 2,600 units in ending inventory. So we have solved the dilemma of how many units are in ending inventory. Under absorption costing, calculate the per unit product cost. So let's see if we can figure out absorption costing, what we say are the units and what is the cost of them. Well, remember, absorption costing says the product cost is direct materials plus direct labor plus variable overhead and fixed overhead. This is the one that includes both of those. So according to our story problem, and this is all in per unit, it's $20 of direct materials, $60 of direct labor, $12 of variable overhead, and $30 of fixed overhead. I'm getting this all from the opening box in the problem. So our grand total is $122. Not much we had to do with that. And then what's the value of the ending inventory under absorption costing? Ending inventory is 2,600 units at $122 a piece. The $317,200 is the value of the ending inventory. And just to remind you of what a variable costing income statement looks like, I'm going to get you a page number. You'll probably end up having to make this income statement at times in your homework problems. So see example on page 347. There's an income statement shown there. Pretty simple. It's just sales minus cost of goods sold equals gross profit or gross margin. Take away the expenses, get profit. That's the typical income statement you've been seeing all along. Now, what if it asks you to do this all with the same problem, but variable costing? And that's what our other exercise is asking us to do. Exercise 14, again asks the question, how many units are in ending inventory? Even though we're keeping track of the costs differently, we aren't changing how many units we produced or how many we sold or anything. So the ending inventory is the same. Per unit cost. Remember what goes in under variable costing, it's only direct materials, direct labor, and variable overhead. So the fixed overhead doesn't get included in this total. So it's the same numbers, just not all of them. You're leaving out the $30 of fixed factory overhead. $92 per unit. So ending inventory is going to be the 2,600 units, but at $92 a piece, giving us a total cost of $239. And that yellow. So variable costing is just a little different. I want you to see what the income statement looks like. See a variable costing income statement on page 348. You'll see that that includes sales at the top, but instead of taking away cost of goods sold, we're taking away the variable cost of goods sold. Everything else is put down below. So cost of goods sold is listed as variable cost of goods sold. It would represent $92 a piece for the units that have been sold. The fixed factory overhead, the fixed selling and administrative expenses are down below in the fixed expenses area. And the difference is called contribution margin. And we saw something like this when we were looking at break even. We looked at contribution margin. So this should be not completely unfamiliar to you also. One last thing to look at. There's a cool little chart on page 349. This works well when you're looking at exam questions that like to ask you all kinds of weird things. Notice that it says when production is bigger than sales, the absorption costing profit or operating income will be bigger than the variable costing one. And then the flip-flop, when production is less than sales, absorption is going to give you a smaller income than variable costing. When they're equal, they'll equal. Those are hard to rationalize times, especially when you're under stress and taking an exam, so that's a great diagram or chart to keep handy. The next thing I'm going to go to is a segmented income statement. Companies often need to know how each segment of their business is doing, not just how's the company doing in general. We're used to income statements that say, company-wide, we made sales of this, cost of goods sold were this, we made profit of this, but it never breaks it down. So we're going to be looking at companies that have more than one type of product and seeing how those get reported in an income statement. So a couple of things we'll need. We're going to look at exercise 17. And you'll see in exercise 17, it refers to the box for Gorman Nurseries, page 369, and they have poinsettias and fruit trees. That's their two lines of product or two segments of their business. They've got the sales listed separately, the variable costs, the direct fixed costs. Now, what is a direct fixed cost? They're fixed costs that can be traced directly to this segment. In other words, they relate to the work being done. If the two types of products are kept in different greenhouses and we know the depreciation for the greenhouses separately, that we'd know the poinsettia depreciation and the fruit tree depreciation as two separate items. We can separate them. We can directly trace them. The other thought, the opposite, would be common fixed costs. These cannot be separated. Usually relate to the company as a whole. So our dilemma in making an income statement is that we can't just make one big column. Well, we could make one big column and say this is the income statement, but it doesn't tell the reader anything. So when we make the segmented income statement, we're going to make a column for, spell this word, and one for fruit trees. And then we'll have a total. And we still will show sales. These are going to be easy enough. We're just going to drop in the amounts they tell us for sales. $970,000, $3,100,000. So definitely a much bigger segment of their business is fruit trees than poinsettias. Then we need the variable cost of goods sold. Again, given to us in the problem. And we're going to subtract those two to get contribution margin. We have one more thing. Before we do contribution margin, we need the variable selling expenses. Widen that out a little bit. They aren't listed in the chart in the problem or the beginning information, but they are listed in the paragraph below. And I got a little too quick there thinking I was done and forgot to grab the 4% selling the sales commissions. Okay, and so 4% of the sales. So we want 4% of the amount of the sales. And do that for both columns. I'll carry it over. Now we've got both selling expenses. Now we can figure out both variable costs. Sorry, contribution margin is the sales minus this expense and this expense, both variable costs. We'll do that for all the columns. Let's draw a nice underline here. And then after contribution margin, just like when we're doing break even, we want to take away the fixed costs. We're going to do very specific fixed cost. We want to look only at the direct fixed cost, direct fixed overhead, and those are given in the problem. These are the ones that can be directly traced to this particular segment of the business. And are there any direct selling and administrative expenses? And yes, there are. Direct selling and administrative expenses. Those are given again in the paragraph around where they talked about the 4%. And they said that for poinsettias, it's $146,000. And for the fruit trees, only $87,000. For some reason, it's less there, even though they make a whole lot more sales of fruit trees. So now we can come up with what the segment margin is. This is something we haven't seen before. Looking at each segment, how did they fare profit-wise? Well, after they took away the variable expenses, poinsettias contributed to covering the fixed costs, $471,200. That's their contribution. They have fixed costs directly traceable to them that look like approximately about $306,000. So when I take those away, there's still $162,500 positive that's going to go help cover the cost of the company's overall common fixed costs. We're going to do the same thing here and here. And now we're going to look at common fixed costs. That includes common fixed overhead, I don't know what happened to my C there, but it decided to disappear. And remember, these cannot be traced to one segment or the other. So instead of putting them in the poinsettia or the fruit tree column, I'm just putting them over here in the total, because the two segments together brought us over $1 million. That's going to help cover these fixed costs. And one of the fixed costs is the common overhead, which is a big cost, $800,000. And now common fixed selling and administrative. So I'm just going to abbreviate that, selling and administrative expenses, common ones. And those are another $450,000. So there's a lot of costs there. We take those away, we can tell if the company is making a profit. Call that operating income. When we look at that, we're going to take away both these expenses, and unfortunately the company's not making a profit as a whole, but each segment is helping to contribute to the fixed costs. They're just not contributing enough to cover the common fixed costs. So you'll be looking at making segmented income statements in your homework. Remember to put the direct fixed costs under each segment. Figure out the profit before you even worry about common fixed costs. And then when you do the common fixed cost, put them in the total column and don't try to put them under either segment. Don't give a portion of them to each because they've already said they're common. They really don't relate to one segment versus the other. They can't be separated easily. Okay, a couple other topics in the chapter, small ones. Talking about the cost of having inventory. I told you there's a lot of little concepts in this chapter. One of them relates to what it costs us to have inventory. Order costs. What does it cost to place an order and receive an order? Every time you place an order, maybe there's shipping and handling costs. There's the cost of unloading it when it comes to the back loading dock. Every order costs you some money, so there's an incentive to place fewer number of orders. But if you place a whole bunch of orders or place a few orders, then you got to buy a lot at each order. You have to increase the amount you order. That means you got to probably have a warehouse to stock all this stuff in, to hold on to it until you're ready to sell it. And those are called carrying costs, the cost of having all that inventory. On forklifts who are putting it in all the locations, people in the warehouse, there might be security guards that are needed at the warehouse, insurance on the warehouse. There's just lots of stuff that go into the fact that the more you are holding on to, the more it costs you money. Not to mention that when you buy a big order of inventory, you're spending a lot of your money to buy that stuff, and you're not going to get any money out of it until you sell it. So the longer it sits on your shelves, the longer your money is tied up. So you're going to see those, and there's also a cost. It's a little harder sometimes to put a number on, but they're called stock out costs. So if we're buying things either to sell or to use as a raw material in our production, and we don't have it because we didn't order enough, didn't plan well, or something is held up in the order trying to get to us, that costs us money. And that's what a stock out cost is. We're going to talk about all those costs as we go along and use them to help us figure out exactly how much we should order and when we should order. So the first thing you're going to do is figure out all these costs. What are order costs? What are carrying costs? And so on. And to do that, we're in the same zone we were before, looking at exercises on page 369. So let's look at exercise 818 on page 369. We have a box for the company, and it says that they buy lava stone. They purchase it from external suppliers. About 8,000 pounds of lava stone is used every year. So they use a lot of this stuff. They're going to order a lot of it, and it's currently purchased in groups of about 500 pounds. It costs them $5 to place an order, so not a huge order cost. And holding on to the lava stone costs them about $2 a pound. So how many orders do they place a year? Well, they're not asking how many they should. The first question is how many do they? So that one's pretty easy. 8,000 pounds used each year. 500 ordered at a time. So we can do some quick math and go 8,000 divided into 500. We order 16, we place 16 orders each year. And then B says, what is the total ordering cost? 16 orders, $5 per order to place the order and process the order. We spend about $80 per year in ordering costs. And then what's the carrying cost per year? Our carrying costs are going to relate to how many we have in stock. And that's the average number of units in inventory. If we order 500 at a time, there's going to be times when all 500 are here. We just received the order. And there's times when we get close to placing the next order where we hardly have any at all. So to average that out, it's 500 divided by 2. It's going to equal 250. It's going to be our average inventory. And to get carrying costs, it's 250 average inventory. £250 and averaging $2 a pound to hold them in inventory means our carrying costs are $500 a year. And the last question is, in our exercise, what is the total cost of the inventory? This is not the cost we pay to actually buy the items. That's going to be really strange. Total cost of inventory is going to be just the total order costs plus the total carrying costs. We figured those out in B and in C. So our total is 580. Those are coming up with the inventory costs. Now we want to get into a topic called economic order quantity, EOQ. What it's trying to decide is, what is the optimal number of items to order? We've been ordering 500. That leads to us holding on to a bunch of them. We don't want to order too small an amount because every time we place an order, it costs us $5. So we also want to minimize the number of orders that we place because we don't want to keep paying $5 for every order, but we also don't want to order so many that we're left with this huge cost of holding on to them all. Remember, it's $2 a pound to hold on to them. So kind of in a quandary of which way to go with that. The formula for economic order quantity can look daunting. It's the square root of, and here's what you've got to do. 2 times the cost of placing one order times demand divided by the carrying costs of 1 unit of inventory. Okay, in words that looks just terrible, but then in symbols it also looks terrible. So let's see if we can break this down. We're not going to worry about the square root part first. 2, and we'll do our times symbol. And let's center that. The cost of placing one order. Well, we know the cost of placing one order is $5. I want to look at next part says the demand. Well, the demand, how many do we use in a year? And if I remember right, our problem said we use 8,000. So we need 8,000, that's our demand. And the carrying cost of one unit is $2. See how it breaks down to a much simpler problem? So 2 times 5 is $10. So now we're doing $10 times, and 8,000 divided by $2 is 4,000. So now we're coming down to $10 times 4,000. So our cost here is 40,000. But remember, we still have to find the square root of it. So we're looking for the square root of 40,000. Probably didn't want to put equals there. Excel will do square roots for you. Type SQRT, square root, and then touch the number you want the square root of. Well, typically, how about a parenthesis and then touch the number? I always like to forget the parenthesis. There you go. That's the economic order quantity. That says $200 is what they're telling us is the best quantity to order. If we order 200 units, we can place orders fairly frequently, make it incur the $5 cost, but we won't be holding on to a ton of inventory like we were when we ordered 500. So you'll be working on finding economic order quantities. The last thing relates to it, and it's reorder point and safety stock. Okay, this one is something we do in our own lives all the time. At what level do you let the items get to before it's, oh, we better order some more, we're getting kind of low? What's the definition of kind of low? That's what a reorder point is. Do we say, oh, when inventory gets down to 10 items, it's time to reorder? Or do we get down to 50? How do you decide what number? Now, some of the things you got to think about is how fast do I use it up? I don't want to run out. So if I use them really fast, I'm going to want to make sure I have more in stock. If I use them really slowly, then I've got time to run out to the store or to call my supplier and order some more. The other thought is, how long does it take to get to me? If I call the supplier and tell them I need another case, or in the example we just looked at, we said the economic order quantity is 200. So when I call my supplier, I'm saying I want to place an order of 200 units, 200 pounds, 200, whatever it is. How long does it take that 200 to get to me? I need to make sure I have enough in stock to last me until that new shipment comes in. So that's all going to come into play in a reorder point. And then safety stock is the cushion I have on hand to allow for variations in usage. Maybe I've done this whole reorder point thinking I use about 5 units a day. So having 20 on hand is probably cool. It'll get me by for 4 days, assuming I use 5 a day. But what if there's a potential that some days I use 8 units of product? There's just these rare days, but they happen, that I use more. The safety stock would say keep enough on hand to be able to cover those 8 days, or those 8 units a day for 4 days. Have some cushion just in case that worst case happens, that every day you use the maximum instead of the expected amount. So for the formulas for reorder point and safety stock, you're going to want to look at page 357. Formula is the rate of usage times lead time. Lead time is how long does the order take to get to me. If we look at an exercise in the book, we can look at exercise 820. It's on page 370. And that says that the company, same company we were looking at before, and they have 8,000 pounds of lava stone is used a year. They use it evenly at the rate of 30 pounds a day. So there's your rate of usage. And the lead time, how long the order takes to get to me, is also told. It says it takes 5 days from the time of order to the arrival of the order. We don't want to run out, and we're going to use 30 a day. So the reorder point says when you get to 150 units, you need to be reordering, because that's going to be just enough to get you by the 5 days that you have to wait for the order to come in. So when inventory gets to 150 units, that's when to reorder. And then if you go to exercise 21, that says, what about safety stock? Safety stock comes into play when there's a difference. Here they were just sure that the rate of usage was 30 pounds a day. If they're very, very comfortable with that, they can wait till their inventory gets to 150 units. But if there's a chance that could vary, you need to have some safety stock. And it says that the normal usage, 30 units per day. Maximum usage, we'll call that, those days when it goes over, could be as much as 35 units per day. And it still takes 5 days, so we didn't change the lead time. So we said the reorder point was 150 units. So you figure safety stock. We take the maximum minus the normal and times that by the lead time. That's 5 units times 5 days, which equals 25 units. So we want a safety stock of 25 units. So the reorder point with safety stock is 150 plus 25 for a total of 175 units. So to be extra careful, we're going to reorder when the inventory gets to 175. That takes into consideration the fact that during those 5 days we're waiting for the order to come in. While we think we're only going to use 30 units, what if we need to use 35 every day? We will still have enough, and we won't run into any of those stock out costs, the costs of not having inventory when we need it. Yeah, it takes care of everything in the chapter. Take some time, take it concept by concept, do the homework out of order if you need to. Just spend time doing only, let's say, variable and absorption costing problems. Then move on and find all the homework problems that deal with segmented income statements, and so on all the way through. That can work as a good learning strategy. If you find you're having trouble, usually then you can say, hey, I do great on problems like this and this, but I need help on these type of problems. It makes the chapter seem less daunting.